Hello everyone, I hope you're doing well. This comes as no surprise to anyone, but in case you've been living under a rock for the last several years, God of War Ragnarök is easily the most anticipated game of 2022. Honestly, this hasn't been a particularly good year for AAA games, so it's refreshing as hell to have such a hammer strike as Ragnarök to bookend the year. The game starts off with a bang. Within the first hour, we have a great chase sequence, nuanced storytelling, and 2 epic boss battles. The second fight alone would rival most final boss fights of any other AAA game. But here, we're just getting started. My first impressions were glowing as well due to the butter smooth controls. Honestly, it felt like driving a Tesla vehicle. You feel powerful but elegant. The seamless transitions from gameplay to cinematic carry over from the last game, and they take these ideas even further. Honestly, this is some of the most impressive cinematography you'll ever see in any video game. This surely doesn't come as any surprise at this point, but this game sports some of the most impressive environments you'll ever see. This game was an absolute joy to explore. The world building is fascinating and substantially builds upon what we've seen in the last game. And this time we get to explore all the realms, and even the realms we are somewhat familiar with, they've had a noticeable iteration. But the vistas, oh lord! There are so many moments that made me just stop in my tracks, drop everything, look around the environment, and think, whoa. On top of that, there's just an incredible range of colors that are both vibrant and luscious. It just pops on screen. It's refreshing, and it goes a long way to give the game a sense of variety. The character models are equally impressive. There isn't a single character that hasn't received that same passionate love and care from the developers. They're all intricately detailed, whether it's the carvings on their weapons or the engravings on their armor pieces. Honestly, there'll be moments where I would just stop what I'd be doing to just look at Kratos' armor pieces and just drool all over them. It's phenomenal work. And this attention to detail carries over into the animation department. During cinematic moments, characters are expressive and are capable of showing very nuanced emotion. It's some of the best character animations I've ever seen. However, outside of the cinematics, I have noticed a few very wooden and stiff animations during some very important narrative beats. And during those weaker moments, the lip syncing in particular was atrocious. Luckily, these rare moments are very much the exception to the rule, because the rest of the game is simply immaculate in its visual presentation. As far as I'm concerned, God of War Ragnarök sets a new standard in visual fidelity, which makes the next point all the more astounding. If I had one word to describe God of War Ragnarök, it's that it's clean. After 45 hours spent in the game, I only had 3 bugs. I am not exaggerating. One time I fell through the floor and saw the void, which was damn near close to a walkthrough break, but luckily I was able to climb back up. And mind you, this is the one and only time I ever noticed even the slightest frame rate drop in this immaculate visual presentation. All I did was restart the PS5, and from there, back to butter smooth frame rate. And finally, I did have one contextual prompt on screen that even after I completed it, it still lingered over and even carried over into a cinematic cutscene, which was quite an important narrative beat, so it kind of got in the way of me enjoying that moment. So yeah, 3 bucks. I can't stress to you just how astounding of an achievement this is. It's a technical marvel and will be the selling point of any other game. But here is just another arrow in the Ragnarök quiver. As for the gameplay, it's very much more of the same since the Ghost of Sparta's last adventure. I won't say there are no innovations, but it's very much the same gameplay foundation since 2018. I won't spoil any of the iterations for you, by all means discover that for yourselves, but there are some meaningful wrinkles added to the gameplay and systems. However, that being said, the weapons are the same and function largely as they did back in 2018. You will find the same red chests and normal yellow glowing chests in the environment that yield hack silver, crafting material, or perhaps equipment sometimes. And of course, the Nornir chests are back with their 3-step puzzles. Don't get me wrong, they're still satisfying to complete, but the rewards are exactly the same as they were in the previous game. Even the menus structurally are the same as they were before. Sure, there is some very nice visual polish added to it. I'm not saying any of these design decisions are bad per se. My only point is that there are no surprises when it comes to the gameplay systems or the core gameplay loop. These are very much the same old Spartan boots we've been wearing since 2018, with some admittedly immaculate spit shine applied to them. Yes, I do wish they brought more innovation to the table, but there is something to be said about that old expression. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Because honestly, the core gameplay loop is still very compelling. And through the eyes of a game's production, it's an interesting creative choice to leverage that gameplay foundation that's already been built and focus on the world building and the narrative, which in that regard they've cut no corners. And while we're still talking about gameplay, I am impressed with the variety present in this game. We have more enemy variety than ever before, which addresses one of the main points of criticism from the last game. This time there's minimal boss reuse, unlike, for example, the trolls back in the 2018 game, where we had to fight them over and over and over again. Yes, there is some reuse, but it might be like 3 or 4 times per archetype. And even then, between those instances, you'll have other boss archetypes, and there's quite a variety of those boss types. And of course, this comes as no surprise, but the combat is just as visceral and satisfying as it's ever been. This easily is one of the best combat gameplay systems out on the market right now. My only complaint here is that it risks being a bit repetitive at times, which is a nice segue into what I feel are some of the weaker aspects of God of War Ragnarok. In my opinion, there's a bit too much filler content. For example, some fights, I feel like there's at least one wave of enemies too many. The pacing never really changes, so all you're tested on is your endurance, which isn't a bad idea per se. I just feel that it oversaturates the global experience. Next, I got fatigued with all the puzzles everywhere. Don't get me wrong, they're not terrible. There are some very clever designs sprinkled throughout your playthrough. But it's just overwhelming to have a puzzle almost every step of the way. In every new room you will find a puzzle. And they're never crazy challenging. It's just a bit time consuming to find out. Usually it's the last step of the puzzle where you're just spinning around in circles looking for that item or whatever until you have that aha moment and then you can proceed. Which unfortunately results in quite a bit of downtime of you wandering about aimlessly looking for who knows what. When I scale this downtime over an entire playthrough of the game, I can't help but recognize that there is a bit of fat that could be trimmed. This is my opinion, of course, but I would much prefer less puzzles, but have them more challenging and also more meaningful in terms of the world lore. Maybe it could actually teach us something about the world. What we have here works gameplay-wise, and like I said, in some very clever ways. But when it comes to the layout and world building, it feels absolutely shoehorned in. Which brings me to add my voice to the chorus of internet complaints. Yes, the NPC companions that you travel with totally spoil the puzzles every fucking time. Which makes me wonder, why was this creative decision taken? Did the devs during the play sessions recognize that, oh my god, like we have too many puzzles and we have too much downtime, so therefore we're gonna help the player along to move them forward? If that's the case, I feel like they've only succeeded in spotlighting the issue even more than ever, rather than actually fixing it, or rather in this case, masking an issue. It's not the end of the world. Like I said, there are some clever puzzles along the way, but it's just a bit too much. Furthermore, there are some pacing issues with the story. This is partly due to the filler content that I was just talking about a moment ago. You will have some wide stretches between those narrative beats that only get longer because of that optional content. But of course, this is in many ways a self-induced flaw. Nobody's forcing you to take those optional paths. But even along the main path, you will undoubtedly run into that filler content nonetheless. It's unavoidable. Luckily, the moment-to-moment gameplay is super engaging, so it's easy to forgive a momentary weakness every now and then. But honestly, there are some main quests that feel very much like side quest material. I won't go into detail to spoil anything, of course, but for example, there's a point in the story where you're looking for a door, and you kind of have to go on a fetch quest to find it, only to realize, hey, this wasn't the right door, and you have to go all the way across the map to another point and realize, oh wait, this also isn't the right door, and go all the way across. You guys get the idea. Even more astounding is the moment where you have to explore a cave and to take out like 4 nests of these really annoying creatures, and they are annoying creatures. I think everyone hates these creatures just as much as I do. I haven't heard a single person say otherwise, and I don't even have to question about it. It just comes out naturally. Anyways, you clear out those 4 nests so that someone can go get their paint in peace. I wish I was kidding. Thankfully, these weaker main quests are very few, but it is something worth mentioning. However, arguably my biggest issue with Ragnarok is the over-reliance on invisible walls. Yeah, all games use invisible walls, and that's fine, but Ragnarok takes this to the extreme, to the point where it almost becomes comical. It's somewhat perplexing that Kratos, the god of war, can't traverse an area due to a few slanted rocks in an area that otherwise feels quite inviting and also somewhat metric compliant. I mean, once again, Kratos is a god for crying out loud, and we've seen him in this game and previous games just get thrown across the sky, crash through rocks, statues on his way down to an epic boss battle, but God forbid he should walk over uneven terrain. But it's even more confusing when you consider that Kratos jumps over empty chasms with his blades of chaos, as we've even seen in the gameplay trailer. Additionally, this is one example we talked about quite a bit in The Office. At one point, there's an obstruction in your path, and Kratos needs to take a big detour around to find himself behind that very same object that was blocking his path. Only this time you have an interaction to literally move that object that was blocking you. What? Why can't we have done that before? This is a classic example where video games kind of betray world logic and player expectations. Finally, there are countless moments where you have to slowly squeeze through cracks in the wall, climb up walls, or lift a giant rock or whatever to move into the next section. These gameplay gates are used to box players into combat encounters. It works, but by now, I feel like it's worn out its welcome. It's starting to feel last gen. It will be interesting to see further on other games and the future of this franchise to see what other gameplay languages can we use for the same effect. They are by no means deal-breaking, but they are rather immersion-breaking and an otherwise rock-solid immersive gameplay experience. And speaking of immersion-breaking elements, everything is super grounded in Nordic mythology, which is wonderful. But there are still some very gamey integrations. For example, we have these glowing red chests in the middle of a snowy ruins. Everything is super grounded in Nordic mythology, and that's wonderful. But then you run across a glowing red chest in the middle of a snowy ruins. It sticks out like an orange bell on a green hat. Or for example, you have your glowing green health pickups on the ground during your combat sequences, which is fine. But then you'll seamlessly transition to a cinematic moment in that same area, and it's going to be a super deep, passionate, heartfelt moment with this giant glowing green thing on the screen. Yes, I am nitpicking, but it is rather jarring in an otherwise sublime narrative and immersive experience. Which brings us to the last part of this review. Even with the outstanding praise for the visual fidelity, or the godlike technical achievement, and even with some of the points of criticism I do have for God of War Ragnarök, they are completely eclipsed by the narrative experience of this game. It is a force to be reckoned with. Christopher Judge just won the Game Award for his performance as Kratos, and it is a well-deserved award. Even if his speech was way too long. God damn. Al Pacino, I'm so sorry you had to stand there for so long. Your legs must be killing you. Anyways, never in a million years did I think that I would see the Ghost of Sparta. That guy. I never thought I would see that man in such a vulnerable state. And honestly, there's a shocking amount of wisdom that he shares with us in this game. It was an incredibly nuanced performance and one that will live with me for years. And by the way, that praise applies to the entire cast of Ragnarok. Atreus, of course, has a massive piece of the acting pie, and Sonny Suljic does wonders with that role. He shows wisdom far beyond his age in these incredibly complex and delicate situations. But these deep character developments applies to more than just the main characters. For example, Brock and Sindri have been catapulted from comic relief dwarves in the past game into unforgettable companion characters in this game. Wow, I did not expect that at all. Freya as well has an incredible narrative arc and is easily a runner-up for my favorite supporting character in the game. But it's a rather impossible choice to make because there's quite a lot of new characters that have been introduced into this world. And of course, I will not spoil the fun of discovering these characters for yourselves. Though perhaps most noteworthy are the Aesir gods. Thor is mighty and intimidating. The first scene with him is gold. Though perhaps the biggest surprise for me was Odin himself. What a unique and fascinating interpretation of the Allfather. Yeah, the scope of this game is massive, which makes it all the more impressive that so much of the narrative content is as potent as it is. Considering how a lot of AAA games handle a nuanced narrative, I would compare them to a bull in the china shop. So it's simply remarkable what the writers at Santa Monica have achieved. And once again, a well-deserved Game Award last Thursday. I am not spoiling a single story beat, but I will say that this game features some of the best character banter ever. Your exploration in the environment will never be boring due to the stellar gameplay, minus some filler content, but this banter makes it all the more easier to swallow. This is due to the incredibly meaningful chatter between the characters that are following you. They can be funny, thought-provoking, educating on the world building, and even nostalgic, with Kratos recalling past events from nearly 20 years of gaming as the Ghost of Sparta. And another selling point, as if this game needs any more by now, are the excellent side quests. There are some truly memorable narrative and gameplay moments here. Honestly, some of those side quests feel like main quest material. In this regard, they put most of the competition to shame with the side quests alone. Finally, I truly appreciate all the animal love in Ragnarok. There are some genuinely heartwarming and at times heartbreaking moments in that regard. So yeah, in a sea of disappointing AAA games that came out this year, this is a planet-killing asteroid strike in comparison to the meek puddle splash of the rest of the competition. Apart from a choice few exceptions, of course, such as Elden Ring or Horizon Forbidden West. It's so obvious in every frame of this game that this was a passion project and not just some cash grab to continue on the success of the franchise. Its success is found in its minute attention to detail, in its nuance, and its power. Though I do have some issues with the gameplay loop, and perhaps if I can add one last final complaint about the final boss battle, of course, no spoilers, but I do feel that the area of the final fight is rather mundane. Definitely a missed opportunity. Anyway, even with the acknowledged weaknesses, there's no doubt in my mind that this is among the best that we can get from AAA gaming. It's a powerful and nuanced journey that I won't soon forget. I'm going to give God of War Ragnarok a rock-solid 9 out of 10. And when I consider just how clean it is, especially in comparison to a slew of shamefully broken AAA launches, I am more than happy to bump this to a 9.5 out of 10. There is no denying that this is an instant classic and a game that all developers and gamers alike should look up to for inspiration and awe. And that is all for today. This was a long one, but it was worth it. The year is almost over. I still have a few games to finish, as well as a bunch of films to see in the cinema at the year end. So yeah, it's gonna be a busy end of the year for me, but I'm excited for all of it. As always, wishing you and your family nothing but the best. Take care and talk to you soon.